Model driven engineering. In today's session, we will be discussing about model driven engineering. What is model driven engineering? Model driven engineering is an approach to software development where models rather than programs are the principal outputs of the development process. So, model driven engineering is an approach to the development of a software where models are the principal outputs of the development process. In this approach, programs execute both on hardware as well as software platforms. In this approach, engineers need not to be concerned with programming languages. Then we will see what are the uses of model driven engineering. So we got an idea about what is model driven engineering. Model driven engineering in the sense it is an approach to the software development where models are the where models rather than programs are the outputs of the development process. That is, we obtain models as the output of the development process, and the programs execute both on the hardware and the software platforms. Now we shall see what are all the uses of model driven engineering. So model driven engineering is still at an early stage of development, so that it is unclear whether or not it will have a significant effect on the software engineering practice. So for now, we have both the advantages and disadvantages of the model driven engineering. So let's see what are all there. Firstly, pros, that is advantages. Model driven engineering approach allows the system to be considered at high level of abstractions. Means briefing of system that is to be developed is done at higher levels. That is what the first advantage. Next, model driven engineering generates code automatically. It means that it is cheaper to adopt the systems to the new platforms. So it is said that generating code automatically is an advantage of the model driven engineering approach. Next, we shall see what are all the disadvantages, that is, what are the cons of the model driven engineering. The first cons is that a model for abstraction and not necessarily right for implementation. It means that, as I said in pros, so model driven engineering allows the system abstraction at higher levels. These models are not meant for abstraction only, and they are all necessary for implementation purposes also. That is what the disadvantage of the model driven engineering. And second disadvantage is that as model driven engineering will generate code automatically, it is cheaper to adopt the systems to the new platforms. But you need to spend on translators, that is, you have to spend more cost on the translators for those new platforms. So these are all the disadvantages of the model driven engineering. So the first advantage is that is having two advantages and two disadvantages. So the first advantage is that this approach allows the system to be considered at the high levels of abstraction, means briefing can be done at the higher levels. So the second advantage is that model driven engineering generates the code automatically. It means that it is cheaper to adapt the systems to the new platforms. So the disadvantages are, there are two disadvantages, there is two cons. The first cons is that models for abstraction are not necessarily right for implementation. In the sense, model driven engineering allows the system abstraction at higher level, as you know. So these models are meant for abstraction only, and they are not necessary for implementation purposes. Then the second disadvantage is that, as we know that a model driven engineering will generate the code automatically, it is cheaper to adopt the systems to the new platforms, but you need to spend more on the translators for those new platforms. So this is one of the disadvantage of the model driven engineering. Next, we shall see the model driven architecture. So model-driven architecture is a model that is focused. It is a model-focused approach. Model-driven architecture is a model-focused approach to software design and implementation. So it uses a subset of the unified modeling language models to describe a system. We have three types of models. They are component independent model, we call it as the CIM, and platform independent model, that is PIM, and platform specific model, that is the PSM. So these are the three types of models you can see in the model driven architecture. So model driven architecture in the sense it is a model focused approach for the software design and implementation, where it make use of the subset of UML models in order to describe a system. So there are three types of models. They are CIM, PIM and PSM, that is a computation independent model and platform independent model and platform specific model. So this is how the model driven architecture will be. So far, we got an idea about what is model-driven engineering and what are the pros and cons of the model-driven engineering and what is model-driven architecture and the types of model-driven architecture. Thank you.